Good afternoon, class. We will continue our discussion on the last topic that we have last meeting. We actually end up with the discussion on the periodicity concept, on the fundamental concepts of accounting, that we have to continue with the stable monetary concept of accounting. The Philippine peso is a reasonable unit of measure and that its purchasing power is relatively stable. This is the basis for ignoring the effects of inflation in the accounting records. Meaning to say, the 1 peso before class for example, 10 years ago, was the same 1 peso that we have today, regardless of the purchasing power of the peso 10 years ago compared to today. Like before, the 1 peso in 10 years ago, maybe you would be able to purchase 3 candies for 1 peso. Or you will be having 4 candies for 1 peso because it costs 25 centavos each. But now, the candies will be costing 1 peso each, meaning to say, the purchasing power 10 years ago is more compared to the 1 peso today. So a stable monetary unit in accounting class adds, deducts peso amount 10 years ago or any value in 10 years ago, whatever balance would be added with the peso value today. So it ignores the inflation or the purchasing power of money. So next, we will be discussing about the basic principles. These are the generally accepted accounting principles. One principle is the objectivity principle, that accounting records and statements are based on the most reliable data available so that they will be as accurate and as useful as possible. Reliable data are verifiable when they can be confirmed by independent observers. Meaning to say, this accounting information should really be that the third parties or interested persons for your financial statements would be able to confirm these financial statements or the information that are contained in your financial statements. Next is the historical cost. This principle states that the acquired assets should be recorded at their actual cost and not at what management thinks that they are worth as at reporting date. So the actual cost of the historical cost is equal to the total cost of purchasing or buying an item, which may include its price, ang kantidad, plus the cost of delivery, or if labor was involved in the delivery of goods, then it should be part of the actual cost. And if the storage, for example, is also taken into consideration, if this items requires storage. So historical cost, I will give you an example that a computer was acquired 2 years ago and the cost of the computer amounts to 35,000. So when we say, for example, 2 years ago, or even if the computers were purchased 10 years ago, still the historical cost is 35 pesos, even if in the books of the business is no longer at 35 pesos. Its value is no longer 35,000 pesos. Maybe later on we would learn what are the factors that would affect the value of an asset. But in comparison to a market value class, the market value is the present value of the computer that was purchased 2 years ago or 10 years ago in the example that I gave you, would be the present value. Meaning to say, If the computer that you acquired 2 years ago cost you 35,000 and it can be sold for 15,000 today, if there are interested buyers to buy the computer for 15,000 after 2 years that you have used the computer, meaning to say the market value of that computer is 15,000. So the market value is really the present value, or the marketability, the market value, or the marketability of those assets for the current period. Okay, so that's the difference between historical cost and market value. So the historical cost does not changes over time. So kung pilay kantidad ka sa pagpalit nimo, it could still be the historical cost. And if you are asked today, how much is the historical cost of your computer 2 years ago, it's still at 35,000. But if you will be asked, how much is the book value of that computer today after 2 years ago, then it will be a different thing, because there will be factors that we're going to discuss that will affect the value of the asset. No? Next, revenue recognition principle. Revenue is recognized in the accounting period when goods are delivered or services are rendered or performed. So, puti pa sabot, the revenue or income would only be recognized when you, for example, if your customers ordered from you and then you have already delivered the goods. So the take-off of the income recognition or the revenue recognition is when you deliver the goods. No? But if, for example, you receive advance payment for those goods that you are going to deliver later on, then it's not revenue yet. The takeoff or the qualification requires that the goods should be delivered before a revenue can be recognized. Or services has already been performed. Kung ako, for example, like me, a professional, a certified public accountant, when I perform services, when I'm done performing my services to a client, auditing a client, meaning to say, revenue should also be recognized already, regardless kung tagbayaran na ka or waya. Okay, you have to take note of that. As long as you have delivered the goods, pero waya pa ka kabayari, or tag-advance ka, pag tagbayaran ko in advance, pero waya pa ka ka-deliver ng goods, no? It's not revenue. But when you deliver the goods, pero waya ka kabayari pa, meaning to say, it's already revenue in your books to be recognized. And if you have already performed the service, waya pa kabayari, it's still a service income or an income already or revenue on your part. Although these are not yet paid. No? Next is expense recognition principle. Expenses should be recognized in the accounting period in which goods and services are used up. Kibali na gamit na nato, no? For you to recognize it as an expense. Even if waya pa nimo sa kabayari, nagamit na nimo, dapat i-expense na. But when you pay for an expense in advance, then that's a different thing. Dili pa dapat nimo ma-expense. No? Because ya pa man nimo siya magamit, even if nag-advance na ka pagbayad. So the moment that you have been benefited, no, or you are now benefited of the expense, then it should be a expense already in your books, even if you have not yet paid this expense. So, for example, a concrete example, you have Sorneco bill for the month of August, which was received and paid by the business in September. We usually receive the bill after we use, no? For example, sa August, makadawat kita ng bill din na sa September. And it also sa due date, later pa gani, no? More than half of the month, no? And due date, no? So for example, September 20 and it's a due date, saan mo pa sa ka magbayad. But in your books, dapat, since nakabenepisyo na ka, dapat na-expense mo na siya in the month of August. Dili kon kanus ako nagbayad sa imo bayro nun sa Sorneco. Or kung sa revenue kinta, on the part of Sorneco, dapat na income na niya for the month of August. Dili kon kanus ako nagbayad, i-deserve pa i-income ni Sorneco. No. It is when si Sorneco naka-perform ng service, or it is also when that you use the benefit of the use of electricity is the right timing for you to recognize as expense. Adequate disclosure requires that all relevant information that would affect the user's understanding and assessment of the accounting entity be disclosed in the financial statements. So adequate disclosure really is required by the Bureau of Internal Revenue in the preparation of the financial statements. It is a mandatory disclosure for all taxes paid for the current period, or for the taxable period, based on the audit report. And then another disclosure required if the business has outstanding obligation or utang from creditors. The said obligation should be disclosed in the financial statement stating the amount of obligation, the interest rate to be paid, the terms of the loan, and the repayment scheme. Kung kanusan mo sa bayaran, kung installment ba siya or one-time payment, or the maturity date when the obligation is due. No? So those are the adequate disclosure. What happens if this obligation will not be disclosed in the financial statements? Like, di ba mo utang na 1 million, waya ni mo ibutang sa imo financial statement. So puti pasabot. Maradyaw ang imo financial capacity. Kay because why imo utang? Puro ra assets ang nakita, and then your equity. No? So it's not reflective of what really is the business about or the financial status of the business. It's not reflective because waya ni mo ibutang na may utang ka. And sometimes, class, in reality, people or businessmen will really do that to be able to, to be able to borrow funds, no? Kaya kung dyan ay umutang na 1 million tapos ang imo assets is only less than 1 million, uman pa umutangon pa man ka kung mangutang ka sa lain. After reading or understanding your financial statements, dili ka juga pa utangon kay mas dako pa imo utang kaysa imo assets. No? Things like that. So that's why it is really a mandatory to disclose financial information that will affect, the financial status of the business. Next, materiality. Financial reporting is only concerned with information that is significant enough to affect evaluations and decision. Materiality depends on the size and nature of the items judged in the particular circumstance of its omission. So, for example, class, a 1 peso discrepancy or omission may not be material to a company's total assets amounts to 1 billion. So, total assets class or liabilities, that take note that the take-off will always be assets or liabilities. Ni amount na 1 billion. So it may not be material for a company, but it may be material for a company whose capital is only 10 pesos. So yempre kay piso kada ko na sa 10 pesos, di ba? Kung ang imo capital 10 pesos tapos nawaya ang piso na, you omit or the error is 1 peso, so kinahanglan gyud i-restate ang financial statement. But as I said, kung ang asset ng isa ka company dinagko millions pagkatapos anawaya 1 peso, kinahanglan pa ba i-restate? No, no need because it doesn't even affect. Kung imo sa 1 peso divided by 1 million, 0.0001 siguro ganito sa an is a result. So meaning to say, it's not even 1% or it's not even 10%. Because the threshold actually in accounting class is really 10% of the total assets or liabilities. Total assets or total liabilities. Based on the professional judgment of the certified public accountant. So mga CPAs ba dyan mag-determine kung if it's material or not. But of course, there is always a systematic calculation for materiality. We have actually a formula how to determine materiality. Consistency principle, the firm should use the same accounting method from period to period to achieve comparability over time within a single enterprise. However, changes are permitted if justifiable and disclosed in the financial statement. So here, ang buti pasabot, consistency, kung ano yung tagamit na method sa isa atong pagsugod nimo, After 5 years of operation, it is understood that it is the same method that you used when you started 5 years ago. And then dapat kuman 5 years ago. But it is allowed, no? That you are going to have a decision to change the method of, for example, depreciation method, no? It is allowed, provided that it is fully disclosed in the financial statement that you shifted in the 5th year from what is the conventional that you used 5 years ago and what you use today. And its effect to the financial statement or the financial information, financial figures should really be also disclosed or computed. So that is consistency, no? Underlying assumptions. We have two underlying assumptions, accrual basis and cash basis accounting. So dapat, when we say accrual basis, revenue is recorded as they are earned, even it is not yet received, and expenses are recorded as they are incurred, even if these expenses were not yet paid. So that is accrual basis. And good example is atong Sorneco for the accrual basis. No, nakibali, nagamit ani kita, then sa sunod pa buyang kita nagbayad. But then, for example, if it happens, it is the end of an accounting period, December 31, and the books, no, for that year, dapat it includes, no, your electric bill consumption for that year, kay even though if you have paid it in the following year, sa January na 2021, for example, kinta. Basta, it is when, no, accrual basis for expense, kung kanus as nimo siya nagamit, dili kung kanus animo tagbayaran. For income, kung kanus dapat nimo siya na income, naka-perform ko ng service, naka-deliver ng goods, pero waya pa ko kabayari, no? It is the right timing for you to recognize them. And what is cash basis accounting? The cash basis is kung kanus ako nagbayad, mag-record ko ng expense. Kung kanus akaw sab nag-kolekta for income, kanus ani mo sa nakolekta, amo sa ba nimo pag-recognize ng revenue? Like ito sa Sorneco. Ang bill na sa August, tagbayaran, nakolekta ng Sorneco diri pa sa September. So meaning to say, kung cash basis accounting class, ang ija income, kung pila kanus as sa tagbayaran, adto pa sa September sa naka-income. Sa August, liya pa sa kabayari, subuti pa sa buhay, ija income sa August. Tapos sa expense, on the part of atong tag-servisyohan consumer ng Sorneco, konsumante ng Sorneco, puti pasabot, kung cash basis accounting, sa September pa man sa nagbayad sa ija bill, puti pasabot, ang ija expense is also recorded in the month of September. Dili kun sa August, kung kanus ang ija nagamit. No? That is cash basis accounting in comparison to accrual basis accounting. So I have an illustration here. No, it is, actually I have already explained it to you. I just hope that you will be able to comprehend them. Going concern, financial statements are normally prepared in the assumption that enterprise is a going concern. Kibalibuti masabot, mag-continue siya. Why ija intensyon na mag-stop ng operation? Why ija intensyon na muundang na siya? That is the point there. So when you operate the business is considered as a going concern because not unless, not for some circumstances, why you will stop the operations of the business. It will be a going concern. Continue. Especially if the purpose of doing business is achieved, then of course the going concern would always be continued. So this is about the accountancy profession. So I will not deal with this one. It's you have to read this one. The career opportunities for a certified public accountant. I am also into public practice, aside from I am into academe or education. And those engaged or employed in the government is those engaged in government service. And those engaged in private sectors, no, for establishments, companies, are those engaged in commerce and industry. So upatra, no, ang classification of a certified public accountant. And we have the branches of accounting and area of specialization. Again, I will not deal it with you, no, because you will not be interested with this one. But of course, it will be part of the exam or quiz. Later on, no, 1 hour before we are going to end our class, I'm going to activate a quiz. So dapat you have to answer. So the quiz would be limited to module number 2, the next topic that I'm going to take up now. So I will stop the sharing because I have to open module 2. Okay, module 2 is about accounting equation and the double entry system. This is actually the prelude, or if you miss this topic, you would really be having difficulty in the accounting subject, because once you miss this discussion in module 2, di na ka mo dadyang kasabot sa accounting. So you have there the parts of an information system. I will not again discuss it with you, but I will directly discuss the accounting information system, that every business has a business organization must have an accounting information system, which will generate reliable and financial information needed by the decision makers in a timely manner. That, of course, there should be a manual of this accounting information. What should be the manual? Like, if, for example, if you classify an item as cash, for example, the account title is cash, although later part, no, we will be learning account titles like cash, supplies, and etc. Aton computer is also a account title, but it is a office equipment, classified as an office equipment. But for a sole proprietor, you can use a computer equipment, no? Actually, you design your own, no, account titles, but in the professional sense of certified public accountant, they are going to reclassify it to what is acceptable, no, in the profession. The account titles that are acceptable in the profession. So we have the 2 types of accounting information system. You have the stages of data processing. For every data that is processed in the computerized system or an accounting system, it really requires source documents. Again, I will not deal this one more because it will be taken up, no, in the succeeding discussion that I'm going to have regarding the accounts, no. And then we are now going to take up now. This is the start of the accounting process, which is the elements of financial statements. That the basic elements, no? Actually, there are 5 basic financial statements, and it would be discussed later on. So it's not yet here in the pre-discussion of accounting or the basics of accounting. That the elements of the statement of financial position, I will change this color. That the statement of financial position or the financial position has elements like assets, liabilities, and equity, no? So these are the elements of the statement of financial position. And for the statement of income, or for the financial performance of the statement of income, a statement of comprehensive income, the elements are income and expense, no? Income and expenses. You don't say incomes because income is already a plural form. So ang kita, sanan ang mga gastos sa business are the elements for the financial performance. So the statement of income or the statement of comprehensive income. So in summary, the elements of financial statements are defined as follows. You have asset, an economic resource controlled by the entity as a result of past events. An economic resource is a right and that has a potential to produce economic benefits. But simply put, my definition of asset is just a simple definition, class. It is anything that you own. No? Anything that you own is an asset. That, of course, the asset can be for a shorter period of time, that it can also be for a long period of time, like ang mga computers, di ba? Like ang mga sakyanan. Of course, dili dadon siya mahurot, mahilis, no? Dili siya dadon madaot. But then, when we talk about supplies, office supplies, its usefulness would only be a short term, a short period, no? But later on, we will be discussing about when do we classify it as an asset, the supplies, when does the supplies become an asset and when the supplies become an expense, no? Later on. Liability, it's a present obligation. It's a present obligation of the entity to transfer an economic resource as a result of past events. Simply put, a liability is an utang. No? Utang, whatever utang, later on we would learn that utang really is a liability. So I will highlight this one so that you would be able to understand na masadun sila sabton. Okay. Equity. This is the residual interest in the assets of the entity after deducting all its liabilities. Later on, we will take up in thorough discussion about equity. Income, so this represents your revenue. Kita nimo sa imo pagnegosyo. And expenses, of course, these are related to all expenses related to nag-generate ka ng income or those expenses that you incurred in the business. So, of course, aton definition of the financial position, I will not deal with the rights, everything, no? Liabilities are obligations or utang. Equity is the residual, as I've said, it is a residual, and we are going to take it up here now. The detailed discussion. You have the accounting equation class is assets is equals to liabilities plus capital or equity. That based on the definition that equity is the residual interest because after deducting from assets liability. So equity is equals to assets minus liability. So if you have 100 pesos na assets, kuhaanan imo utang na 20 pesos, so your equity is 80 pesos. Okay? So that is what is meant by residual interest. Then financial performance or income and expense, aton lagi income na imo kita and then the expense. So these are the basic two elements, no, of financial performance. The account. Okay. So the basic summary device of accounting is the account. A separate account is maintained for each element that appears in the statement of financial position. Buti pa sabot, ang assets ba sa class, di ba, remember that the elements of the statement of financial position or the financial position are assets, liabilities, and equity. That under assets, arang hamok account titles class, hamok accounts, no, under assets. And hamok sub accounts under liabilities. And that is what is next that we're going to do next meeting, no? Discuss. So that please do not be absent next meeting. It's very important. And then equity, kung uno sa mga accounts that can be classified as equity. Actually, class, in reality or in actual definition, when we expand equity class, it will include the accounts under statement or the performance, financial performance, or the statement of income, which is the income and expense. Later on, I will show it to you. So the simplest form of the account is the T account. So it really looks like T. And that the account has three parts. The account title, no, on the topmost, and then the left side or the debit side, and the third one is the right side or the credit side. All entries or debit entries should be recorded on the debit side of the account, no? And all credit entries will be recorded on the credit side of the account. But you have to take note, class, that the normal balance of the account will really differ. So when you say, going back to the accounting equation, that assets are equal to liabilities plus equity, and you have to take note that the normal balance of the accounts of assets are debit. So dapat ba dyan ato ibutang sa alimpatakan? This is already the basic of accounting. Na tanan asset and ija normal balance is debit. So buti pasabot, kung ako kuhaan ang assets, maghimo ako ng credit entry. So increases for assets are on the debit side or debit entries, while decreases for assets are recorded as credit entry. So in opposite, liabilities and equity has a normal balance of credit, and decreases of which requires debit entry. So balikon ko, in summary, tanan assets has a normal balance of debit. So kung ato i-increase ang asset, ang ato entry is debit. Pero kung ato i-decrease ang asset, ang ato entry should be credit. But unlike liabilities and equity, and if the normal balance is credit, so increases would be credit entries. Kung ato padakuan ang liabilities or equity, dapat credit ato entry. Pero kung ato i-reduce ang liability or equity, dapat the entry should be debit. Now you have to take note of that. And also, we have here, in the balance, that there is always, that the debit should always be equal to credit. Or when we prepare the journal entries, the debit entries should always be equal to credit entries. Or always per transaction, there's always a debit and there is always a credit. Partners siya. Dili siya pwede na mulaong kita na debit ra or debit ra or credit ra. Because the entry later on, we will learn that there should be a debit entry should be equal to all credits. Or if there are more than one debit, the total of which should be equal to the total credit. Or there will be more than one credit, the total of which should be equal to the debit total. Ana siya. Next is, for example ako na. Nagpalit ng ballpen. The ballpen cost 7 pesos. So kung remember, ako na tag-extract atong the normal balance of the accounts, asset, liabilities, and equity na debit, tapos ang liabilities and equity credit. O based on here, no? And then, kung nagpalit ka ng ballpen, ang nahitabo, if ballpen is an asset, I said that anything that you own, assets are anything that you own. So, kung magpalit ka ng ballpen, the assets will increase. So, dyan plus ballpen, ang assets. And then, kaya magamit man ko ng cash, which is also an asset, magamay ang assets. So, in short, there's no effect, no? Ni taas ang assets, pero ni gamay rasap ang assets. Buti pa sabot, there is no effect. Meaning to say, on the other side of the equation, there is no effect. No effect on liabilities, no effect also on equity. Or if we give value to the analysis, nagdugang kita ng 7 pesos na itong kantidad ng ballpen, pero ang ato tagamit pambayad sa pagpalit ng ballpen, cashman, which is an asset, tag minus, so in effect, 0 gihapon. Sa taglaong, no effect. Okay? So kung ato i-translate into entries, di ba lang ako that assets with a normal balance of debit. So kung sa atong ballpen, class, Nagpalit kita ng ballpen, so the entry to the ballpen is debit. And then, kay nakuhaan mo na to cash, so that entry to cash is a credit entry. So, remember, there is always a debit and a credit, or the debit entry should be equal to the credit entries for every transaction. You have to take note of that. And you have the basic tool of accounting is the accounting equation. Ito nakaglaong. This is the accounting equation. And the left side of the equation shows, and then inequality, again, I have already discussed. So in summary, the rules of debit and credit in accounts are, so the normal balance, debit si Jan, and the credit column represents the normal balance of the account. And the credit column also represents the normal balance of the account, or what will happen to the account. Like assets have a normal balance is debit and decreases are credited, no? Atong pareho kayo na sa ballpen na nag-increase an asset, so debit, na kay ni-decrease masab ang asset, that's why tag-credit nato ang cash. Although the assets are although the cash and the ballpen are both assets, but sometimes they can be debited and sometimes they can be credited, depending on the analysis or depending on the transaction. So liabilities, its normal balance is debit or increases are recorded on the credit side. Decreases are debited, no? Debit and entry kung gamaya nato ang utang, or kung magbayad kita ng utang, di ba? Of course, utang mo kamay, no? And then capital would also be, di ba lang we said sa accounting equation kanina sa taas, that the normal balance is also credit, no? That decreases are also on the debit side. Revenue, the normal balance is credit, so increases are on the credit side, decreases are on the debit or the debit entries, no? And expenses, the normal balance is debit, decreases would be on the credit, will be credited, while expenses are, increase in expenses are debited. So you have there the expanded accounting equation. So what about if atong residual, although I have explained it to you, pareho ra sa ako to-discuss kaina. And then we have here the same analysis. I have also discussed to you the normal balance of the account, no? That's it. That is it. So when we say the financial position of the balance sheet accounts, so assets, the increases are on the debit side of the T account because they are debited actually. And decreases are on the credit side of the T account because they have a credit entry. And liabilities increases are on the credit side, decreases are on the debit side. For the equity, so the expense, no? The expense decreases actually equity, no? And it is its normal balance is debit or increases are debited, and while decreases are credited. For income, increases are credited. Again, for income, increases are credited while decreases are debited. So this is the T account that remember, no? The accounts increases in, for example, the debit would be increases in asset, increases in expenses, increases in withdrawals, and also decreases. Debit entries are also decreases in liabilities, decreases in capital, and decreases in income. This requires all debit entries, while all credit entries are increases in liabilities, increases in capital, increases in income, while credit entries are assets, decrease in assets, decrease in expenses, and decrease in withdrawals. So the normal balance of account is, dari kanina, balikon ko sa accounting equation, that all assets have a normal balance of debit and liabilities, and equity has credit. But it would also help you. This table, no, this table here will help you, no? So the accounting events and transactions. So accounting event is an economic occurrence that causes changes in the enterprise assets, liabilities, or equity. Events may be internal actions, such as the use of equipment for the production of goods or services. It can also be an external event, such as the purchase of raw materials from a supplier. A transaction is a particular kind of event that involves a transfer of something of value between two entities. Of course, two entities, kay kunain ka magpalit, that is another entity, plus you, which is another entity. Example of transactions includes acquiring asset. Aton kanina, nagpalit ko ng ball pen na costing 7 pesos o magbayad ko ng utang is an example of a transaction. A transaction can be measured in terms of financial in nature, no? Dapat may monetary value. Otherwise, if there is no monetary value and frequency or unit of measurement, then it cannot be an event or transaction. So I will not be dealing this one. You just read this one. And next meeting, I will be discussing about typical account title used. So at this point, you can ask questions. If you don't have, the quiz is activated. I will just try, no? But I would still, although this is a recorded discussion class, para dili ako karadyo mahago, no? Labi na kay 3 sections for 3 hours. Yeah. No, 3 sections for 3 hours, baga makapaos doon sa ako pagdali. So, next meeting, please do not be absent because otherwise you will not understand accounting anymore. Thank you. You can raise questions after my discussion, after my sharing. Thank you, class, but you have to ask questions. Or the quiz, you answer the quiz right after my discussion. Thank you.